After 4 long years since saying goodbye to her daughter and son-in-law, Abigail continued to fight an internal battle against the deep pain of loss. Yet during a walk with her grandchildren, something extraordinary happened. She saw the deceased couple. This seemingly impossible encounter was about to unravel dark mysteries. I hope you enjoy this story. Nothing is more chilling than watching the news and seeing the growing whirlwind of violence that plagues our times. But what happens when this cruel and cold reality, which we often watch as mere spectators, ruthlessly bursts through our door, sinking its sharp claws into our history? Mrs. Abigail experienced this anguish up close when cruel fate entered without warning, turning her life into a kaleidoscope of fear and despair. In an instant, her peaceful existence shattered like a broken mirror, reflecting a distorted reality. That evening, Abigail was preparing a delicious meal because her grandchildren were coming to stay the night. A tasty cake, the favorite of Amy and Charlie, her 3-year-old twin grandchildren, was already on the table. They were staying with their grandmother so that their parents, Mary and her husband, could attend a play they had been looking forward to. The house was filled with liveliness and joy upon the children's arrival. After the farewells, Abigail was left alone with the twins as the couple set off for their evening out. Abigail cherished having her grandchildren around. They were the light of her life. Together, they had fun, with Abigail sharing stories that made the children's eyes sparkle with excitement. Putting them to bed was easy after a day full of activities that left them exhausted. Meanwhile, not far away, Mary and her husband were enjoying a rare night out alone. Since the twins' arrival, moments like this had become increasingly scarce. But this night was special. It was meant to reignite the flame that time had threatened to extinguish. After the play ended, they decided to visit a restaurant that held memories from the early days of their relationship, a place filled with sighs and reminiscences. The restaurant was just a few blocks away from the theater, allowing them to savor the spring air and each other's company during a leisurely walk. Hand in hand, they strolled through the serene night, illuminated by soft moonlight and bright stars. A gentle breeze caressed their skin, and the scene felt like something out of a fairy tale, a perfect image that reminded them of the first pages of their love story. But as in all great tales, an unexpected twist was about to occur. As they chose a dark alley to shorten their journey, a terrifying scene unfolded before them. The street's darkness grew dense and ominous, and suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the shadows, gripping a weapon with menacing intent. Violence hung palpably in the air, and his sharp words cut through the silence as he demanded they hand over everything they had. Now faced with a life-or-death situation, the couple's hearts raced with fear. They knew they couldn't risk their lives for material possessions. With trembling hands, they began to hand over their belongings when suddenly the night's silence was pierced by the sharp sound of a police siren. The assailant, already on edge, flinched like a cornered animal. Panic overtook him, and without thinking, he abruptly fired the weapon at the couple. The gunshot echoed through the night, a single flash of light tearing through the darkness. Mary and her husband, now involuntary targets, were struck by the same bullet. The searing pain was followed by the reverberating sound of the gunshot bouncing off the alley walls. The ominous noise caught the attention of the approaching police, and a brief but intense chase unfolded, like shadows dancing in the night. Eventually, the assailant was cornered, and silence returned, an oppressive, heavy silence filled with tragedy. In that dark and unforgiving alley, fate had woven a treacherous path. Mary and her husband's bodies now lay lifeless on the cold ground, victims of a series of events beyond their control. The alley, a silent witness, held the secrets of that fateful night. In the early hours of the morning, a phone rang, shattering the silence with an urgency that made Abigail's heart race. She answered, and the news on the other end hit her like a lightning bolt, a shock that pierced deep into her soul. Her only daughter and son-in-law were dead, their lives snuffed out in an instant. The shock rippled through her like an emotional earthquake, shaking the very foundations of her world. Tears flowed as she grappled with a flood of complex and indescribable emotions. The void that opened before her seemed endless, a dark abyss threatening to swallow her whole. The cruelty of life being extinguished so senselessly was almost impossible to comprehend. Now, Abigail was faced with a new and daunting responsibility, raising her grandchildren, Amy and Charlie. These two young, curious souls, only 3 years old, carried the weight of losing their parents in a world they were just beginning to understand. Every day, their sad and innocent questions cut through the air. Where are mommy and daddy? How could she explain the profound absence of their beloved parents? How could she make them understand that they would never return? It was a heartbreaking task, a challenge for which no one is ever truly prepared. As time, relentless as always, moved forward, Abigail and the children found ways to cope with the loss. A new routine slowly emerged, a fragile balance between sorrow and the necessity to move on. Together, they began to build a narrative that honored the memory of the absent parents while allowing space for new joys. However, their approaches to dealing with the loss differed. The children surprisingly sought to remember and share stories about their parents, as if trying to keep them alive through words. Each memory became a thread that kept them connected to their past. Abigail, on the other hand, chose to carry her pain in silence. The wound was too deep, the loss a shadow that darkened every aspect of her life. Speaking about it, confronting the intensity of her grief, felt like tearing her heart apart over and over again. 4 years passed since that dreadful night. The twins, now 7 years old, had found in their grandmother a source of love and care. Yet Abigail felt an immense burden on her shoulders, a responsibility that went beyond mere caregiving. The task before her was monumental: to raise these two children to be kind, compassionate, and resilient despite the tragedy that had marked their early lives. Despite everything, it was school vacation time, and a friend of Abigail's, sensing the need for a break, extended a thoughtful invitation. She invited Abigail and her grandchildren for a few days' retreat at a cozy cabin in the mountains. The idea of escaping the daily routine, leaving worries behind, and offering the children a chance for fun and relaxation brought a rare smile to Abigail's face. The scenery was breathtaking, the cabin nestled in the heart of the mountain, blending seamlessly with the wild beauty of the landscape. Surrounding them, nature unfolded in all its splendor, with the final touch of beauty being the panoramic view of a large lake at the mountain's base, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The children, full of energy and excitement, immediately set out to explore their surroundings. Abigail watched with tenderness as they embarked on this new adventure, but ever the concerned guardian, she reminded them not to venture too far into the forest and to stay close to the cabin so they wouldn't get lost. As the first day turned to dusk, the sun cast warm, golden hues across the horizon. The children continued to play outside while Abigail and her friend prepared dinner. Then the peaceful retreat took an unexpected and alarming turn. Abigail's granddaughter, Amy, suddenly rushed into the cabin, her breath uneven and her eyes wide with urgency. The small, panting figure carried an unsettling restlessness as she recounted a story that froze the air in the room. Amy explained that she and her brother Charlie had been playing hide and seek in the nearby forest, but the game took a terrifying turn when she lost track of Charlie. Despite her insistent calls, there was no response from him. Abigail's friend, familiar with the area, immediately recognized the danger. The forest was a labyrinth of tangled trees and hidden paths, a place where a young child could easily become disoriented. Realizing the urgency, she grabbed the phone and began calling other nearby residents. The gravity of the situation quickly mobilized the community into action. As daylight dwindled, each passing minute made the search more challenging. Shadows grew longer, swallowing the clues that could lead to Charlie. The searchers pressed on, their lanterns cutting through the darkness like stars in a night sky. But strangely, it was as if Charlie had vanished, his footsteps swallowed by the forest. Amy, standing by the searchers, did her best to provide information about where she and Charlie had been, but her resilience was beginning to crumble. She was like a house of cards, unable to withstand the growing storm of fear and exhaustion. Abigail's friend, noticing Amy's exhausted state, suggested that she be taken back to the cabin to rest. Promising that the search would continue, she reassured Amy that everything would be okay. Tenderly supporting her granddaughter, Abigail led her back to the cabin. Inside, as they lay together, Abigail stroked Amy's hair, trying to provide comfort. The fatigue of the tumultuous day weighed heavily on her as well, and her mind was a whirlwind of worries and silent prayers. As Amy's eyes slowly closed, carried away by exhaustion, Abigail too succumbed to sleep, though it was restless, an uneasy dance of dreams and worries intertwining in a whirlpool of thoughts. In this half-dreaming state, Abigail experienced something that seemed to transcend the bounds of mere dreaming. Her eyes, though closed, saw with a clarity she had never known. It was a dream, yet so vivid and tangible that she could feel every breeze, every detail of the environment around her. In that vivid dream, Abigail found herself standing in the cabin, looking out the window. But what she saw through the glass defied all explanation. There before her stood her daughter and son-in-law, the very ones who had been taken by tragedy 4 years ago. Abigail's heart raced as she watched them. Their smiles were radiant, their eyes filled with a peace she could hardly comprehend. An invisible force seemed to draw her, a silent call she couldn't ignore. Without hesitation, she followed the couple as they stepped into the forest, each of their movements like a beacon guiding her way. Abigail's heart pounded as she followed, her feet moving with determination, yet no matter how hard she tried, they remained just out of reach. Their hands were intertwined, their faces calm and serene as they ventured deeper into the forest. Their figures gradually blended with the night shadows until finally they stopped. Before them lay a small crevice in the mountain, an entrance to a tiny cave. Abigail's heart raced, her emotions swirling. She met her daughter Mary's gaze, and in that moment, Mary's smile shone like a gentle light. Her words echoed in Abigail's mind. Thank you, Mom, for taking care of my babies. With a sudden jolt, Abigail woke up, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She sat up in bed, looking beside her where Amy slept peacefully, unaware of the profound journey her grandmother had just experienced. Without hesitation, Abigail rushed out of the cabin, her heart pounding with urgency. She called out, I know where Charlie is. Her words were a mix of desperation and conviction as she asked if anyone knew of a small cave in the forest, one that matched the description she had seen in her dream. The words flowed from her with a confidence she didn't fully understand. The small cave Abigail described wasn't far from the cabin. The volunteers quickly gathered their lanterns and ventured into the forest. And there, inside the crevice in the mountain, was Charlie. His small, brave figure was bathed in the light of the lanterns, his face a mixture of surprise and relief. Abigail was overcome with awe and gratitude. It felt as if angels, her deceased daughter and son-in-law, had guided her to Charlie through that vision, existing at the edge between dream and reality. The sensation was indescribable, transcending mere words. This experience profoundly changed how Abigail lived with her grief and longing for her lost daughter. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had found a place where it could coexist with a newfound sense of comfort. Abigail began to find joy in memories of her daughter, not just in tears and sadness, but also in shared laughter and moments filled with love. The vision had brought her deep peace, especially in her role of raising her grandchildren. She had seen Mary's smile and felt her gratitude in that vision, a silent confirmation that she was doing a good job. And so, in the quiet of that night in the mountains, Abigail found a peace she could never have predicted. Whether it was a dream, a gift from heaven, or something beyond human understanding, the vision had transformed her pain into something more, something that transcended sadness. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel Stam Talk. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 10 to let us know how much you liked it. Also, be sure to check out the video currently on your screen. See you soon. I'm Sophia, and this is the story of how my life was turned upside down. But let's start from the beginning. I grew up in a wealthy family, the only child of doting parents who gave me everything I could ever want. My father, Robert, was a successful businessman, and my mother, Eleanor, was a socialite known for throwing the best parties in town. They showered me with love and attention, making sure I never lacked anything. When I entered college, I was determined to make my parents proud. I buried myself in books, focusing solely on my studies. That's when Tom came into my life. He was persistent. I'll give him that. He'd wait for me after classes, bring me coffee during late-night study sessions, and even showed up at my parents' house one day. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, he said, standing tall in our living room, I'm in love with your daughter, and I want you to know my intentions are serious. My father was impressed. He'd always wanted a son, someone to take under his wing and groom for the business world. Tom seemed to fit the bill perfectly. Sophia, my father said to me later that evening, why don't you give this young man a chance? He seems like a good catch. Reluctantly, I agreed to go on a date with Tom, and to my surprise, I found myself enjoying his company. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. Our relationship blossomed quickly, And before I knew it, we were walking down the aisle, fresh out of college. My parents were overjoyed, especially my father, who saw Tom as the son he never had. "Welcome to the family, son," my father said, clapping Tom on the back at our wedding reception. "I have big plans for us." True to his word, my father helped Tom start his own business, a state-of-the-art car wash. He bought all the necessary equipment and even helped us purchase a small, cozy house. A year into our marriage, I gave birth to our son, Michael. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I felt a love I had never experienced before. I threw myself into motherhood, becoming a full-time housewife. My days were filled with diaper changes, feeding schedules, and lullabies. As the years passed, our lives settled into a routine. Michael grew from a gurgling baby into a curious toddler, then a mischievous child, and finally, a brooding teenager. I poured my heart and soul into raising him while Tom continued to struggle with the car wash business. "Your father thinks I'm a failure," Tom spat one evening after another tense phone call. "He's always looking down on me, giving me handouts like I'm some charity case." I tried to reassure him. "That's not true, Tom. Dad's just trying to help." But these arguments became more frequent, and I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home. Michael, now in his late teens, began to withdraw, spending more time in his room or out with friends. As for me, the years of stress and housework had taken their toll. I was no longer the slim college girl Tom had wooed. My once toned body had softened, and I had gained weight. Tom didn't hesitate to point this out. "You've really let yourself go, Sophia," he'd say, eyeing me with disappointment. "What happened to that pretty girl I married?" His words stung, but I tried to brush them off. I told myself he was just stressed about work and didn't really mean it. But deep down, I knew our marriage was crumbling. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a sunny Tuesday when I received the call that would shatter my world. "Mrs. Thompson," a somber voice said, "I'm afraid there's been an accident. Your parents, they were in a small plane crash in Hawaii. I'm so sorry, but they didn't survive." The next few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. Tom was surprisingly absent during this time, leaving me to handle everything on my own. When he was around, he seemed almost cheerful. "We need to sort out the inheritance," he said barely a week after the funeral. "Have you spoken to the lawyer yet?" I was shocked by his insensitivity. "Tom, I'm still grieving." "Can't this wait?" He shrugged. "Business doesn't wait, Sophia. We need to know where we stand financially." Reluctantly, I agreed to meet with the family lawyer, Mr. Jacobson. As we sat in his plush office, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Thompson, your parents' will is unusual. It's divided into two parts. I can only reveal the first part now. The second part will be disclosed in exactly 1 year." Tom leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Well, what does the first part say?" Mr. Jacobson adjusted his glasses. "Your parents have left their mansion to your future grandchildren, with their guardians as trustees until they come of age." I was stunned. "But Michael is our only child, and he's not even married yet." As if on cue, Michael, who had insisted on coming to the meeting, let out a low whistle. "Well, that opens up some interesting possibilities, doesn't it?" I turned to look at my son, confused by his reaction, but he avoided my gaze. Tom, on the other hand, was fuming. "That's it?" he demanded. "What about the rest of their assets, the businesses, the money?" Mr. Jacobson shook his head. "I'm afraid that information is in the second part of the will, which cannot be revealed for another year." As we left the lawyer's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Tom was uncharacteristically quiet, while Michael seemed lost in thought. Just a few weeks after the reading of the will, Michael dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. "Mom, Dad," he announced one evening at dinner, "I have someone I want you to meet." The next day, he brought home a young woman named Sarah. She was pretty, with long blonde hair and a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is my wife," Michael said, his arm around her waist, "and she's pregnant with our child." I nearly choked on my tea. Wife? Pregnant? But when did all this happen? Michael shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "We've been dating for a while. When we found out about the baby, we decided to get married right away." I couldn't help but notice how his eyes flickered to Tom, who was nodding approvingly. Something about this whole situation felt off. But I pushed my doubts aside. After all, I was going to be a grandmother. Well, congratulations, I said, trying to muster up some enthusiasm. This is quite a surprise. Sarah's smile widened. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I'm so excited to be part of your family. From that day on, our household dynamics shifted dramatically. Sarah moved in, citing the need to be close to family during her pregnancy. At first, I was thrilled to have a female companion in the house. However, it quickly became apparent that Sarah had her own agenda. She began to subtly undermine me at every turn. When I cooked dinner, she'd wrinkle her nose and say, "Oh, is that how you make it?" I always thought it was done differently. But it was her interactions with Tom that really set off alarm bells. She'd laugh at his jokes, touch his arm, and shower him with compliments. "You're such a talented businessman, Tom," she'd coo. "I don't know how you manage it all." Tom predictably lapped up the attention. He began spending more time at home. But not with me. He'd sit for hours talking business with Sarah. While I was pushed to the background, I tried to talk to Michael about Sarah's behavior, but he brushed off my concerns. "Mom, you're just being paranoid," he'd say. "Sarah's great. Maybe you're just jealous because you're not the center of attention anymore." His words hurt more than he could ever know. Had I really raised a son who cared so little for his mother's feelings? As for Tom, he seemed to revel in the new family dynamic. He beamed with pride whenever Sarah complimented him, and I often caught him looking at me with something akin to disgust. One day, while I was out grocery shopping, I ran into an old college friend, Jessica. We decided to catch up over coffee, and as we reminisced about our college days, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Remember that guy who was always chasing rich girls?" Jessica asked. "What was his name?" "Tom something." My heart skipped a beat. "Tom? Tom who?" Jessica laughed. "Oh, that sleazy guy who tried to date every girl with wealthy parents. He ended up marrying some naive rich girl, if I remember correctly." As Jessica continued talking, describing Tom's behavior in college, I felt like I was going to be sick. The Tom she was describing sounded exactly like my husband. Had our entire marriage been based on a lie? With a heavy heart and shaking hands, I pulled into our driveway. The house loomed before me, no longer the cozy home I once loved, but a stage for the drama that was about to unfold. I found Tom in his study, poring over some papers. He barely looked up when I entered. "Tom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk." He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "What is it now, Sophia?" I took a deep breath. "I ran into Jessica today. You remember her from college, right?" A flicker of something, was it fear, passed across his face before he schooled his features into indifference. Vaguely. "What about her?" "She told me about a guy in college, a guy who pursued rich girls, looking for an easy meal ticket." I paused, watching his reaction. "Sound familiar, Tom?" For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, to my shock, he started laughing. "Well, well," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Took you long enough to figure it out, didn't it?" His cavalier attitude stunned me. "So it's true? You married me for my parents' money." Tom shrugged, not a hint of remorse in his eyes. "Of course I did. Look, Sophia, I never loved you. I tolerated you because you were my meal ticket. But now you're just a fat, useless burden." His words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, tears welling in my eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" I whispered. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Because, my dear wife, I don't need you anymore. Your parents are dead, and soon their fortune will be mine. Or rather, our grandsons, which amounts to the same thing." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Michael's hasty marriage, Sarah's convenient pregnancy, the way they'd been treating me. It had all been a calculated move to secure my parents' inheritance. You planned all this?" I gasped. Tom laughed again, the sound grating on my nerves. Give credit where it's due, it was mostly Michael's idea. The boy's got a good head for business, unlike his mother. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. "Does Sarah know about this?" "Of course she does," Tom sneered. "She's a smart girl, knows a good opportunity when she sees one. Unlike you, she'll make a proper wife for a businessman." I couldn't take any more. I turned and fled from the room, my world shattered around me. As the reality of my situation sank in, I realized I had nowhere to go. I had no money of my own, not even enough to rent an apartment. With a heavy heart, I resigned myself to staying in the house with people I could no longer trust. 2 months later, Tom dropped another bombshell on me. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he strolled in with a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Pack your bags, Lydia," he announced without preamble. "We're moving into your parents' house." I nearly dropped the knife I was holding. "What? When did we decide this?" Tom's laugh was cold and mocking. "We didn't decide anything. I decided. We're moving in with Michael and Sarah. After all, our grandson is the heir to that house." Each word was like a slap to my face. "What do you mean? What about our house?" "Oh, that?" Tom waved dismissively. "I sold it. The money's already been spent on things for people I actually care about. And just so we're clear, you're not on that list." Over the next few days, I watched in stunned silence as Tom, Michael, and Sarah excitedly prepared for the move. They bought new cars, splurged on expensive clothes and gadgets, all while I faded into the background, ignored and forgotten. The move to my parents' house was like a twisted parody of a happy family relocation. Sarah immediately claimed the master bedroom, while I was relegated to a small guest room in the back of the house. As the days passed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Sarah gave birth to my grandson and began delegating all the housework to me. I cooked, cleaned, and even cared for my grandson while she lounged about, issuing orders like a queen. "Sophia," she'd call out, "the baby needs changing. And while you're at it, could you tidy up the living room? It's looking a bit messy." I threw myself into caring for my grandson, the only thing keeping me going in a life that had become unrecognizable. Finding solace in my grandson's innocent smiles and gurgles, I clung to those moments of joy, even though they were tainted by the constant barbs and criticism from Sarah and Tom. One evening, about a month after we had moved in, things came to a head. We were all seated at the dinner table, a dinner I had prepared, as usual. Sarah was in rare form, ordering me around as if I were a servant. "Sophia, fetch me some more water and hurry up with clearing these plates. We don't have all night," she snapped. Something in me snapped too. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. "Enough," I shouted, slamming my hands on the table. "I am not your maid, Sarah. This is my parents' house, and I deserve some respect." The room fell silent. Sarah's face crumpled, and she burst into dramatic tears. "How could you speak to me like that after all we've done for you?" she wailed. Tom stood up, his face red with anger. "That's it, Sophia. I've had enough of your ingratitude. Pack your things and get out. This house belongs to our grandson now, and you're no longer welcome here." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you these." He tossed them on the table. "Divorce papers. Already signed. I want you gone by morning." I looked to Michael, hoping against hope that my son would defend me. But he just shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I'm an adult now, Mom. I don't need you anymore." With shaking hands, I took the divorce papers. Sarah's triumphant smirk was the last thing I saw as I turned and walked out of the dining room, my world crumbling around me. With nowhere to go and my life in shambles, I found myself dialing a familiar number. Jessica, my old college friend, answered on the second ring. "Lydia, is everything okay?" Her voice was laced with concern. I swallowed hard. "Not really. I need a place to stay." Without hesitation, Jessica invited me to her home. As I settled into her guest room, she shared her own family drama. "My son's been going through hell," she confided. "His fiancée left him, and she's pregnant. He's desperate to find her and be there for his child." My heart skipped a beat. "Do you have a picture of her?" Jessica nodded, pulling out her phone. As she showed me the photo, my blood ran cold. Staring back at me was Sarah, my supposed daughter-in-law. "Jessica," I said slowly, "I think I know where your son's fiancée is." Over cups of tea, I poured out my story. Jessica listened, her expression morphing from shock to anger to determination. "We need to expose them," she declared. Together, we hashed a plan. The next day, I returned to my parents' house under the guise of collecting the last of my belongings. While there, I managed to snag a few strands of my grandson's hair for a DNA test. The wait for the results was agonizing. But when they finally came, they confirmed our suspicions. My son was not the father of Sarah's baby, Jessica's son was. As I grappled with how to break this news to Michael and Tom, my phone rang. It was Mr. Jacobson, my parents' lawyer. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "it's time to review the second part of your parents' will. Can you come to my office tomorrow?" The next day, I sat in Mr. Jacobson's plush office, my heart pounding as he read the will. I could hardly believe my ears. "To our beloved daughter Sophia," he read, "we leave our luxury apartment valued at $500,000. But that wasn't all. My parents had foreseen everything. In the event of a divorce, Mr. Jacobson continued, all their property, including Tom's business, will come to you. Your father wants you to know that he's been the one financing Tom's business all along. He registered it in his own name in case of divorce. It's yours to do with as you please." I sat there stunned. All this time, I thought I had nothing, when in reality, I had everything. "What about the house Tom and I lived in?" I asked, remembering he had sold it. Mr. Jacobson smiled. "That's the only thing Tom can claim. Everything else is yours." As the reality of my new situation sank in, I couldn't help but laugh. Tom had thought he was so clever, but in the end he had outsmarted himself. Stepping into my new apartment, I gasped. The space was breathtaking, sleek lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and tasteful furnishings all around. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home. As I explored my new sanctuary, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he said, his tone demanding and entitled, "it's been a year since the first part of the will was read. We need to know what's in the second part. I'm sure Grandpa and Grandma left everything to me, right?" I couldn't help but chuckle inwardly at his presumption. "Michael, this isn't a conversation we should have over the phone. Why don't you, Sarah, and your father come over tomorrow morning? I'll text you the address." After hanging up, I called Jessica. "It's time," I told her. "Can you come over tomorrow morning? We're going to settle this once and for all." The next day, the doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find Tom, Michael, Sarah, and the baby standing there. Their jaws dropped as they took in the luxurious surroundings. Michael whistled. "Wow, Mom, this place is amazing. I can't wait to move in." Sarah's eyes gleamed with greed. "Yes, it'll be so nice once we get rid of all this old lady decor. And of course, once we get rid of you, Sophia." I raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't be so hasty if I were you. Please come in and have a seat." As they settled onto the plush sofa, I excused myself for a moment. When I returned, I wasn't alone. Jessica stood beside me, her presence causing Sarah to pale visibly. "Before we discuss the will," I began, my voice steady, "there's someone I'd like you all to meet. This is my friend Jessica." Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. Michael and Tom just looked confused. "Now," I continued, "I think it's time we all had a frank discussion. There are some truths that need to be revealed." I paused, savoring the moment. All night, I had rehearsed what I was about to say. The words I had practiced, the revelations I was about to make, would change everything. As I looked at the faces of those who had betrayed me, my ex-husband, my son, and the woman who had tried to steal my life, I felt a surge of righteous anger mixed with anticipation. As Jessica stepped closer, Tom's eyes widened with recognition. A smirk spread across his face as he let out a bitter laugh. "Well, well," he sneered, gesturing toward me. "Looks like I achieved my goal after all. Married a rich fool, didn't I?" His words stung, but I held my ground. "We'll address your betrayal later, Tom. Right now, there's something more pressing to discuss." I turned to Sarah, who was visibly squirming. "We know the truth about you, Sarah." Michael looked confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I took a deep breath. "Sarah was looking for a rich husband. When she heard about the will from you, Michael, she saw an opportunity. She decided to pass off someone else's child as your own to get her hands on your grandparents' estate." Jessica stepped forward, her voice steady. "The baby isn't Michael's. It's my son's child." The room fell silent. Then I produced the DNA test results. Sarah's face drained of color as realization dawned. In a flurry of movement, Sarah grabbed her bag. "I don't need this. I don't need a beggar's child," she shouted as she fled the apartment. Michael stood there, shell-shocked, the baby still in his arms. He looked lost, pathetic even. Tom, recovering from the initial shock, asked in a small voice, "So who gets this apartment?" I couldn't help but smile. "Well, Tom, let me enlighten you about the second part of my parents' will." I explained everything, the apartment, the car wash, all of it. Tom's face fell with each revelation. Suddenly, Tom was on his knees. Sophia, please, I'm sorry. Forgive me. We can work this out. I looked at him coldly. Get out, Tom. You have 2 days to leave my parents' house, or I'm calling the police. As Tom scrambled to his feet, he turned to Michael. Son, give me the car I bought you. I need something. Michael's response was curt. No, it's mine. You're not getting anything from me. With one last desperate look, Tom slunk out of the apartment. I then turned to Michael, who stood there, head bowed in shame. Jessica gently took the baby from his arms. Michael, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. Since it turns out I don't have any grandchildren, there are no other heirs to your grandparents' home besides me. I need you to move out as well. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I'll go pack my things. With that, he too left the apartment. As the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath. The apartment was quiet now, save for the soft coo of the baby in Jessica's arms. I looked at my old friend, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. Well, I said, managing a small smile, that didn't go quite how I expected when I woke up this morning. Jessica nodded, bouncing the baby gently. You did what you had to do, Sophia. They left you no choice. As I sank onto the plush sofa, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly free, free from deception, free from manipulation, and free to live life on my own terms. The months following the confrontation flew by in a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. I found myself settling into my luxurious apartment, the space becoming a sanctuary of peace and new beginnings. One of my first decisions was to rent out my parents' house. It felt right somehow to have the property occupied by a young family who appreciated its warmth and history. The rental income provided a comfortable cushion, adding to the proceeds from selling Tom's car wash business. My friendship with Jessica blossomed. We'd meet for coffee, sharing stories and supporting each other through the ups and downs of our new realities. And then there was little Tommy, Jessica's grandson, the child I had once believed to be my own. Despite the painful circumstances of his birth, I found myself developing a deep affection for the boy. He has your eyes, Jessica would joke during our visits, and we'd laugh, finding humor in the absurdity of our intertwined lives. My relationship with Michael was a work in progress. The betrayal had cut deep, but he was still my son, and I couldn't bring myself to sever that bond completely. Our interactions were tentative at first, awkward phone calls and stilted meetings in neutral coffee shops. But slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. As for Tom, he became a ghost in my past. I heard through the grapevine that he'd fallen on hard times, his grandiose dreams of wealth and status crumbling in the wake of his exposed deceit. I saw him only once by chance as I was driving through town. He was working at a small kiosk, looking older and wearier than I remembered. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt the flicker of something, not love or longing, but a kind of closure. Then the light changed, and I drove on, leaving that chapter of my life firmly in the rearview mirror. My name is Amanda Pierce, and I'm 32 years old. I was born and raised in Miami, where my life has always revolved around gems and jewelry, just like my parents and grandparents before me. Pierce Gems, our family's boutique jewelry store, is nestled in Miami's upscale shopping district. It's more than just a store, it's my entire world. While most kids spent their childhoods playing in parks, I grew up in the workshop. As others learned to ride bikes, I learned to cut stones. My dad would sit me on his lap, guiding my small hands with his big, callous ones as we crafted pieces together. Remember, Mandy, he'd say in his gruff but kind voice, it's not just about making something beautiful, it's about creating something that tells a story. Our family has a secret, though we're not royalty or anything like that. It's a special technique for processing gems. A technique that makes them shine like nothing else. This secret has been passed down through 3 generations, and it's what sets Pierce Gems apart. Guard this secret with your life, Amanda. My dad told me on my 21st birthday. It's not just our past, it's our future. And so I did. I guarded it fiercely. It was my responsibility, my burden, and my ticket to success in a world that didn't always take a young woman seriously. Pierce Gems wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had a loyal clientele who appreciated the unique brilliance of our pieces. Other jewelers tried to uncover our secret, but none came close. The Gemstone Society's annual gala was always a glamorous affair. But that year felt different. Maybe it was the champagne, Or maybe it was the way my new emerald dress hugged my curves, but I felt electric that night. As I made my way through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces and exchanging pleasantries, the room buzzed with luxury. Designer gowns, tailored suits, and jewels that probably cost more than my first car filled the space. "Amanda, darling, you look fabulous," gushed Marjorie, one of our regular clients, as she grabbed my hands, her eyes zeroing in on the ring I was wearing. "Is this one of your new pieces? It's stunning." I smiled, pride swelling within me. "Just finished it last week. It's part of our new Midnight Sky collection." "I simply must have one," Marjorie declared. "I'll stop by the shop next week." As she fluttered off to gossip with her friends, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find myself staring into the most captivating pair of blue eyes I'd ever seen. "Excuse me," said the owner of those eyes, flashing a smile that could melt ice. I couldn't help but overhear, "You're Amanda Pierce, aren't you?" I nodded, suddenly tongue-tied. "That's me. And you are?" "Jason Ranfield," he replied, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard great things about your work." Ranfield. The name hit me like a ton of bricks. The Ranfields were jewelry royalty, owners of one of the largest jewelry empires in the country. And here was their hair, talking to me like I was the most interesting person in the room. "The pleasure's all mine," I managed to say, shaking his hand. "I didn't realize the Ranfields would be here tonight." Jason laughed, a warm, rich sound that made me feel like we were sharing an inside joke. "We usually skip these events, but I insisted on coming this year. I've been following your work, Amanda. You're making waves in the industry." A blush crept up my cheeks. "That's very kind of you to say." "It's the truth," he said, his eyes twinkling. "In fact, I was hoping we could discuss a potential collaboration. How about dinner next week?" My heart skipped a beat. A collaboration with the Ranfields could take Pierce Gems to the next level. But a small voice in the back of my head whispered a warning. The Ranfields were our biggest competitors. Could they be trusted? I pushed the thought aside. This was business, nothing more. "Dinner sounds great," I heard myself say. Jason's smile widened. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant set it up." He glanced over my shoulder and frowned slightly. "I'm afraid I have to mingle, but I'm looking forward to our dinner, Amanda." As he walked away, I felt like I was floating. Jason Ranfield had sought me out, me, Amanda Pierce, the girl who spent more time with gems than with people. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I danced, I laughed, I networked, but my mind kept drifting back to those blue eyes and that dazzling smile. Jason had chosen a trendy restaurant in South Beach, the kind of place where the who's who of Miami came to see and be seen. As I walked in, I spotted him immediately, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored suit. He stood up as I approached, his eyes lighting up. "Amanda," he said, taking my hand, "you look stunning." I felt a flutter in my stomach but pushed it down. "Thank you, Jason. You clean up pretty well yourself." As we sipped our wine, the conversation flowed easily. We talked about our shared passion for jewelry, swapping stories about difficult clients and challenging designs. I found myself relaxing, drawn in by Jason's wit and charm. As our main courses arrived, I decided to bring up what had been on my mind since the gala. "You mentioned a potential collaboration at the gala," I said, raising an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Jason leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "I've been following your work for a while now, Amanda. The way you bring out the brilliance in gems, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. I believe a partnership between Pierce Gems and Ranfield Jewelry could revolutionize the industry." "That's a bold statement," I replied, intrigued but cautious. "How exactly would this partnership work?" "We have the resources and the reach," Jason explained. "You have the skill and the innovation. Together, we could create a line that combines the best of both our worlds." I had to admit, the idea was tempting. But years of guarding our family secret had made me wary. And what about our individual techniques? Our trade secrets? Jason held up his hands in reassurance. Those would remain separate, of course. This would be about combining our strengths, not revealing our secrets. I nodded slowly, turning the idea over in my mind. It's an interesting proposition. I need to think about it, discuss it with my team. "Of course," Jason said with an understanding smile. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." As dinner progressed, our conversation drifted from business to more personal topics. Jason opened up about the pressures of growing up in the shadow of the Ranfield Empire, the expectations that came with his family name. I found myself sharing my own experiences, the weight of carrying on the Pierce legacy. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. Jason swept me off my feet with grand gestures and intimate moments. One weekend, he surprised me with a spontaneous trip to the Bahamas. "Pack a bag," he said, showing up at my door with a mischievous grin. "We're going on an adventure." I hesitated, thinking about the orders I needed to fill. "Jason, I can't just leave. I have work." He silenced me with a kiss. "The work will be there when you get back." "When's the last time you took a break, Amanda?" I couldn't remember, and that realization made me pause. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did need a break. The Bahamas were like a dream. We spent our days lounging on pristine beaches, snorkeling in crystal clear waters, and our nights dancing under the stars. It was intoxicating being the center of Jason's attention. Back in Miami, our relationship continued to blossom. Jason would surprise me with rare orchids flown in from Thailand, their delicate petals a testament to his thoughtfulness. We'd spend evenings at fancy restaurants or quiet nights talking for hours about everything and nothing. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The first time Jason took me to meet his parents, I felt like I'd stepped into a lion's den. Vivian Ranfield, Jason's mother, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "So you're the little jeweler Jason's been spending so much time with," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I straightened my spine, meeting her gaze. "That's right. Amanda Pierce of Pierce Gems. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Ranfield." Robert Ranfield, Jason's father, was a bit warmer, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. "Pierce Gems," he mused. "You've been making quite a name for yourself lately. Impressive for such a small operation." The dinner was a minefield of backhanded compliments and thinly veiled insults. At one point, Vivian accidentally spilled her red wine on my dress. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, not sounding sorry at all. "I suppose your hands must be too rough from all that manual labor to hold delicate glassware properly." I plastered on a smile even as I seethed inside. "No worries, Mrs. Ranfield. Accidents happen." Jason squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. Later, as he drove me home, he apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry about my parents," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They can be difficult." I sighed, looking out at the Miami skyline. "It's okay. I'm sure they're just protective of you." Jason shook his head. "It's not okay. You're important to me, Amanda. They need to accept that." His words warmed my heart, pushing away the lingering chill from his parents' cold reception. As weeks turned into months, I found myself falling harder for Jason. He was everything I'd never known I wanted, charming, worldly, and seemingly head over heels for me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated for more than just my craft. We'd been dating for about 8 months when he surprised me with a trip to Paris. "Pack your bags, darling," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "We're off to the city of love." And so I found myself in Paris, strolling hand in hand with Jason along the Seine, marveling at the architecture and indulging in decadent French cuisine. It was like a dream. On our last night in Paris, Jason took me to dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant with a view of the Eiffel Tower. As we finished our dessert, he suddenly looked nervous. "Amanda," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I can't imagine my life without you." He stood up, and to my shock, got down on one knee beside our table. The other diners gasped and turned to watch. "Amanda Pierce," Jason said, pulling out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" I stared at the ring in shock. It was beautiful, but a small part of me couldn't help but notice that it paled in comparison to my own creations. I pushed that thought aside, focusing instead on the man kneeling before me, his eyes full of hope and love. "Yes," I heard myself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." When we returned to Miami, reality came crashing back. Jason's parents insisted on throwing us an engagement party, and I found myself thrust into a world of high society that I'd only ever observed from the outside. The party was a lavish affair at the Ranfield Mansion. As I circulated among Miami's elite, I couldn't help but feel out of place. These people lived in a different world than I did, a world of old money and ingrained privilege. Vivian Ranfield cornered me by the champagne fountain, her smile as sharp as a diamond-tipped saw. "Amanda, darling, I must say, We were all quite surprised when Jason announced your engagement. It's not often a Ranfield marries outside our social circle. Before I could respond, Jason appeared at my side, placing a protective arm around my waist. Mother, I hope you're not giving Amanda a hard time. Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course not, darling. I was just welcoming Amanda to the family. Later that night, as Jason and I slow danced under the crystal chandeliers, he leaned in close. I have an idea, he whispered. Why don't you make a special piece for my mother as a peace offering? Show her what you can do. I hesitated. The Pierce family secret wasn't something I shared lightly, even with my fiancé. But maybe Jason was right. Maybe this could be a way to bridge the gap between our two worlds. The weeks following our engagement were a whirlwind of wedding planning. I threw myself into creating the perfect necklace for Vivian, hoping it would be the olive branch that could finally win her over. I spent countless hours in my workshop, pouring my heart and soul into the piece. I used rare pink diamonds and a flawless blue sapphire from my father's private collection. It was to be my masterpiece, a testament to my skill and the Pierce family secret. One evening, as I was putting the finishing touches on the clasp, Jason stopped by the workshop. His eyes widened. Amanda, it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. I felt a surge of pride. Do you think your mother will like it? Jason nodded, his eyes still fixed on the necklace. She'd be a fool not to. The way it catches the light, it's almost otherworldly. I smiled, pleased with his reaction. That's the Pierce touch. The next week, I was at the Ranfield mansion for another wedding planning session. Suddenly, I heard raised voices coming from down the hall. I slipped out of the room and followed the sound of the voices. As I got closer, I could make out what they were saying. You're being ridiculous, came Robert's deep voice. This marriage is a golden opportunity. Don't tell me you're getting cold feet now. It's not like that, Jason protested. But nothing, Vivian's shrill voice cut in. You've done well, darling. She's eating out of the palm of your hand. Sue will have everything we need. I edged closer to the partially open door, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the crack, I could see Jason pacing back and forth, sipping wine from a glass. You should see how eagerly she's making that necklace, he said, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. She has no idea she's handing over the keys to her entire legacy. Vivian's laugh pierced the air like a knife. And to think we almost objected to you marrying that little nobody. I must say, Jason, your acting skills have improved tremendously. She actually believes you love her. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake. But Robert's next words shattered any lingering doubt. Once we have the Pierce secret, we'll corner the market, he said, his voice filled with smug satisfaction. Who cares if her quaint little shop goes under? It's just business after all. I felt like I was going to be sick. My vision blurred with unshed tears as the full weight of their betrayal hit me. Jason, the man I thought I loved, the man I had agreed to marry, had been using me all along. The days following my shocking discovery were a blur of emotions and careful planning. On the surface, I played the part of the excited bride to be perfectly. I gushed over flower arrangements, fretted about seating charts, and continued working on Vivian's necklace. But inside, I was seething with rage and plotting my revenge. How's the necklace coming along, darling? Jason asked one evening, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I worked in my studio. I fought the urge to flinch away from his touch. Almost done, I replied, forcing a smile. Your mother is going to love it. Late into the night after Jason had gone home, I began creating a new collection. Each piece was a work of art, telling the story of betrayal through intricate designs and carefully chosen gems. But jewelry wasn't my only focus. One day, I broke into Jason's home computer and downloaded all the files I could find. I spent hours poring over the Ranfield Company documents, looking for any discrepancies or signs of wrongdoing. It was tedious work, but my determination fueled me. One night, as I was going through a stack of financial reports, something caught my eye. The Ranfields had been systematically replacing high-quality gems with cheaper alternatives in their jewelry, scamming their customers out of millions. The next challenge was gathering evidence of their plot against me. I bought a small, high-quality recording device and began carrying it with me everywhere. It felt dirty, but I reminded myself that they had started this game. I was just finishing it. As the final week before the wedding arrived, I put the finishing touches on my plan. I had evidence of the Ranfield gem scam, recordings of their plot against me, and a collection that would shock Miami's elite to its core. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect Miami day. As I arrived at the beachfront venue, my heart was pounding, but my resolve was firm. I clutched my velvet-lined case containing my new collection and all the evidence I'd gathered like a lifeline. "Amanda, there you are." Jason's best man, Mark, called out as I entered. "Everyone's been looking for you. Are you ready?" I gave him a tight smile. "More ready than you know." As I was ushered into a private room to wait, I could hear the murmur of guests arriving outside. Miami's elite, all gathered to witness what they thought would be the society wedding of the year. If only they knew. The wedding march began to play, and I started my walk down the aisle. Faces turned to watch me, smiling and expectant. I saw Vivian and Robert in the front row, looking smug and satisfied. Jason waited at the altar, beaming at me. But they had no idea what was coming. As I reached the altar, I took a deep breath and turned to face the guests. The murmurs quieted, and all eyes were on me. I met Jason's gaze, his smile faltering slightly as he sensed something was off. "Before we begin," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "there's something I need to share with all of you." Jason's brow furrowed in confusion, but he said nothing. I could feel the tension in the air as the guests exchanged puzzled glances. "I've spent the past few months creating something special," I continued, opening the velvet-lined case I'd been holding. Inside were the pieces from my new collection, each one a stunning work of art, glittering under the soft light. "But these aren't just any pieces of jewelry," I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. "They tell a story of betrayal, deceit, and revenge." A shocked gasp rippled through the crowd, and Jason's face paled. "Amanda, what are you doing?" he hissed, reaching for my arm. I stepped back, out of his reach. "You see," I said, holding up a necklace, "this piece represents the lies I've been told. And this one," I continued, picking up another, "represents the trust that was shattered." I turned to Vivian and Robert, their expressions frozen in horror. "And this one," I said, lifting the final piece, "is a testament to the lengths some people will go to, all in the name of greed." The silence was deafening. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, the shock and disbelief radiating from the crowd. "But there's more," I said, reaching into the case and pulling out a small stack of documents. "Here's the proof of how Ranfield Jewelry has been scamming its customers, replacing high-quality gems with cheap knockoffs. And here," I added, holding up the recording device, "is the evidence of how Jason and his parents planned to steal the Pierce family secret." Jason's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Amanda, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I cut him off, my voice cold as ice. "This wedding is over, and so is your charade." With that, I turned and walked back down the aisle, the shocked silence of the crowd ringing in my ears. As I reached the doors, I glanced back one last time, taking in the stunned faces of Jason, his parents, and the entire Ranfield family. Then, without another word, I walked out, leaving the life I almost stepped into behind me forever. But as I reached the altar, instead of taking Jason's hand, I turned to face the assembled guests. "I'm afraid there won't be a wedding today," I announced, my voice clear and strong. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Jason's face contorted in confusion. "Amanda, what are you doing?" I ignored him, addressing the guests instead. "Instead, I'll be unveiling my newest collection, The Art of Betrayal." With that, I opened my case and began to pull out the pieces one by one, explaining the symbolism behind each one. The snake bracelet represented deceit, the shattered diamond ring symbolized broken trust, and the color-changing teardrop earrings reflected the shifting nature of lies. As I spoke, I saw understanding and horror dawn on the Ranfields' faces, but I wasn't done yet. "And for the grand final," I said, pulling out Vivian's necklace, "a special commission with a hidden message." I held it up to the light, revealing the word LIAR spelled out in pink diamonds. The crowd gasped again, this time in a mix of shock and admiration. "Amanda, stop this nonsense right now," Robert Ranfield bellowed, his face red with anger. But I was beyond stopping. I pulled out the documents I'd gathered and the recordings I'd made. "The Ranfields aren't just liars in love," I announced. "They're liars in business too. I proceeded to lay out the evidence of their gem scam, playing recordings of their plot against me and Pierce Gems. With each revelation, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, shocked faces turning to the Ranfields for an explanation. "This is preposterous," Vivian shrieked, but her voice was shaking. As security began to escort the sputtering Ranfields out, I addressed the crowd one final time. "I stand before you not as a bride, but as a businesswoman protecting her legacy. Pierce Gems will continue to create beauty and brilliance without compromising our integrity." The aftermath was chaos. Reporters who had come to cover a society wedding found themselves with a much bigger story. Photos of my triumphant face and stunning jewelry splashed across social media and magazines worldwide. In the days following what the press dubbed the wedding that wasn't, my life became a whirlwind of interviews, legal meetings, and damage control. The story had exploded beyond Miami, capturing national attention. My phone rang nonstop with calls from reporters, industry insiders, and even a few Hollywood producers interested in my story. I sat in my workshop, surrounded by half-finished pieces and stacks of newspapers, all featuring my face on the front page. The headlines ranged from "Jewel of Deception," "Hair exposes $1 million scam," to "Love, Lies, and Luxury," the Pierce Ranfield saga. The Ranfield empire crumbled under the weight of the scandal, with multiple lawsuits filed against them. My best friend and now lawyer Sarah burst through the door, her arms full of more newspapers and legal documents. "Amanda," she said, dropping everything on my workbench, "we need to talk strategy. The press is having a field day, and we've got at least a dozen interview requests over the next few weeks." I carefully chose which interviews to give. I spoke about the importance of transparency in the jewelry business, the need for stricter regulations, and my vision for a more ethical industry. As the weeks turned into months, the media frenzy began to die down, but my resolve only grew stronger. I channeled my energy into Pierce Gems, pushing myself to create more innovative designs while maintaining our commitment to ethical sourcing. One evening, as I was locking up the shop, a woman approached me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Miss Pierce," she said hesitantly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you." I tilted my head, confused. "Thank me for what?" She smiled sadly. "I bought a Ranfield piece for my 25th wedding anniversary. After your expose, I had it appraised. Turns out the stone wasn't nearly what they claimed it was. Thanks to you, I was able to get my money back." I felt a lump form in my throat. "I'm glad I could help." As she walked away, I realized that my actions had affected real people, not just faceless consumers. The scandal that had nearly destroyed me had instead become the catalyst for positive change. And I, Amanda Pierce, was just getting started.